this 5-hour DVD, I will help you improve your understanding about middle game strategy. As a Super GM myself, I understand that developing your understanding in middle game is critical to your game. And in my opinion, there are so many different types of middle games that can arise in your practical games. And I will try to cover the most typical pawn structures that may arise from your real tournament games. From this pawn structure, I will explain the typical plans for white and for black, and I hope that I will help you understand more about the plans to play in the middle game. In chapter 1, I will cover the topic of isolated pawn structure. This pawn structure is very typical and can arise from a number of different openings, such as the Queen's Gambit Accepted and some variations of the Nimzo-Indian. The isolated pawn structure is divided as when white or black having a pawn in the center that is not supported by any other pawn on an adjacent file. And this situation will give a lot of advantage and disadvantage to white and to black. So understanding the typical plans for each side and how do you develop your pieces, how do you control the isolated pawn, will give you a lot of value in your practical games. This is a position with an isolated pawn structure. An isolated pawn is defined as a pawn that is not supported by any other pawn on an adjacent file. As you can see, in this position, white has 3 pawn islands. The A and the B pawn are connected. The F, G, and H pawns are also connected. However, the D4 pawn stands alone and is not protected by any other pawn on the C file or the E file. Black, on the other hand, has only 2 pawn islands. The A and the B pawn are connected. The 4 kingside pawns are also connected. So the D4 pawn stands alone at the middle of the board, and this can give you some advantages and some disadvantages. If you are the side with the isolated pawn, you usually have a little bit more space than your opponent because the D4 pawns control C5 and E5, and therefore it gives your pieces a little bit more room to maneuver. Also, at some point, if you can push your isolated pawn ahead, for example, go D5 and exchange with this E6 pawn, then you will have you will eliminate your weakness and give your pieces more space. Black, on the other hand, if they can establish a blockage on the D5 square, then this D4 pawn is not going anywhere. Moreover, the D4 pawn can become a big target for black's pieces because it cannot be defended by any other white pawn. If black attack this pawn, white has to defend it with his pieces, and this can be a difficulty, especially when the number of pieces is reduced, and this can become a major weakness in white's position. Now, the isolated pawn structure can arise from various openings, most often from the Queen's Gambit Accepted, the Pawn attack variation in the Caro-Kann, and some variations in the Nimzo-Indian. Let's look at a few games and see how to use the isolated pawn structure in your advantage. First of all, let's look at a game between Grandmasters Kramnik and Anand in the Dark Moon Super Tournament in 2001. The game starts with d4, Kramnik is white, Anand chose the Queen's Gambit accepted after d4, d5, c4, d takes c4, knight f3, e6, e3, knight f6, bishop c4, c5, castle, a6, bishop b3, c takes d4, e takes d4. Here you can see the position has, white has an isolated pawn on d4. White's plan is to develop the pieces knight c3, bishop g5, rook q1, maybe queen d2, and rook a d1. So you can see all the pieces will focus in the center, and at some point the breakthrough d5 can become really dangerous. Also, a typical plan in those positions is to have the kingside attack. For example, in some cases, this bishop on b3 can go back to c2, this queen can go to d3 and create an attack on this diagonal. When black castle, this can become dangerous. Black continue with knight c6, knight c3, bishop e7, bishop g5, on the normal developing move and put your pieces to more active squares. Black castle, queen d2. Here I also want to let you know that usually it's not a good idea for black to play h6 in those positions, because h6 is a very risky move. White can go back with the bishop on f4, and then at some point in the future, this can become a real threat. Bishop takes h6, and this pawn on h6 becomes a target for white's attack. For example, if white's bishop go back to c2, then this is already a threat. Bishop takes h6, g takes h6, queen takes h6, and that is a very, very strong attack on the black's king. In the game, black played knight a5, attacking white's bishop, and this bishop is very valuable in this position, so white has to keep the bishop c2. The bishop can be on this diagonal b3 g8, or it can be on this diagonal b1 h7. Both diagonal are strong for the bishops, and the bishop can really help white in the attack. Black played b5. This is also a very typical plan for blacks. Usually they try to develop this bishop to b7, so they increase the control over the d5 square. Also, with b5, sometimes you can play b4 or knight c4. This knight can usually go to c4 and b6. So just to control d5. The fight of the isolated pawn structure usually involve fighting for the control of the d5 square. So after b5, Kramnik played queen f4, bringing the queen to the king side. And the threat right now is bishop takes f6. With the idea after bishop takes f6, white will play queen e4 and double attack h7 and a8. Anand played rook a7, getting the rook out of the way of white's attack. Rook a d1. Kramnik continues developing his pieces. Again, h6 is a bad move because bishop takes h6, g takes h6, queen takes h6, and there's no defense against this. The knight has to stay on f6 to prevent the mate on h7, and in a lot of cases white just has all the time to play knight g5 or rook d3, rook g3, and basically black will just got mated. Anand played bishop b7, and here Kramnik came up with a very strong move. I would like you to take a minute to think about this position. You can pause the video and take some time to think. When you're ready, continue the video. Kramnik played d5. So after d5, he can capture it with the bishop, the pawn, and the knight, but only one option is playable. If black capture on d5 with the knight, then white has a very cute tactic. Rook takes d5, bishop takes d5, bishop takes h7 check, king takes h7, queen h4 check, king has to go back to g8, bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, knight g5, and the threat of queen h7 is so strong that the only way for black to stop the threat is to sacrifice his queen with queen takes g5, queen takes g5, and this is a losing position for black. Therefore, black can only take on d5 with the bishop. And after knight takes d5, again, black cannot recapture with the knight, because if knight takes d5, rook takes d5, queen takes d5, and queen h4. And again, white has the double attack on h7 and e7. And if e takes d5, then bishop takes h7, then bishop takes h7, king takes h7, queen h4 check, king g8, bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, knight g5. And against black we have to sacrifice the queen to save the mate, but this is still a losing position. So Anand had to recapture on d5 with the pawn, e takes d5. And here Kramnik continued the attack with queen h4. And Anand has to play h5. h6 is again not a good move because white can take on h6. And after g takes h6, queen takes h6. This attack is so strong, white is threatening rook to d4 and rook g4 or h4 just to checkmate black. For example, rook e8, rook d4, bishop f8, rook g4 check, knight takes g4, and queen h7 is checkmate. Therefore, Anand has to play h5, and g6 is also not a good move because after rook fe1, white is threatening rook take e7, and then bishop takes f6, and there's no good defense against this threat. So h5 is the only move, and Kramnik continued the attack with rook fe1, just activating his pieces and keeping on the pressure. Knight has to go back to c6, and now g4. The attack doesn't stop, and Kramnik threatened to take on h5 with the pawn, and obviously black cannot capture on g4, so he played queen d6, and Kramnik continued with g takes h5. Anand tried to exchange the queen with queen b4. Kramnik played h6, queen takes h4, knight takes h4, and all white pieces are so active and attacking black's king side. So Anand has to give up some material to stop the attack. After knight to e4, h takes g7, rook c8, bishop takes e7, knight takes e7, bishop takes e4, d takes e4, rook takes e4, king takes g7, rook d6. So white is a pawn up, and his initiative still remains there on both the rooks and the knights are very active. And right now he's threatening rook takes e7. After rook takes e7, knight to f5, getting back the exchange. Black play rook c5 to defend against that threat, and white play rook to g4 check, king h7, knight to f3. Basically this endgame is winning because white is a pawn up and black's king is too weak. Knight to g6, knight g5 check, king g7, and knight takes f7. White wins another pawn, and the rest of the game is an easy win for Kramnik. We will look at another Queen's Gambit accepted game. This one is between Bacrot and Edouard in 2012 Grand Prix. White started with d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, c4, d takes c4, e3, e6, bishop takes c4, c5, castle, a6, bishop b3, knight c6, knight c3, cd4, ed4. Again, the isolated pawn structure has arisen. Bishop e7, bishop g5, castle, queen d2. So you can see that Bacrot play very similar setup to Kramnik. Knight a5, bishop c2, b5, queen f4, bishop b7. This is a deviation. Anand in his game against Kramnik played rook a7 instead. After bishop b7, Bacrot continued with queen h4, the very normal idea of putting the queen on h4 and create the threat of bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and queen h7 mate. So black has to defend against this threat. He played g6. It's worth to note that h6 again doesn't work because of bishop takes h6. By now you should be familiar with this pattern. G takes h6, queen takes h6, and white threatening knight g5. So, for example, if rook e8, then knight g5, and white is winning with the threat of bishop h7. And if not rook e8 but bishop f3, then g takes f3, and there's no defense against king h1 and rook g1 check. Therefore, black has to play g6, weakening the king side. Although it looks like black has managed to defend the h7 square, but right now this diagonal has become a weakness, and you can see that black's knight is pinned. It cannot move because black will lose the bishop on e7. So white continue with a very typical pattern in this line. Again, sacrifice a pawn to open the lines and the space for your pieces. d5. Black cannot take on d5 with any piece, because if knight takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop g5, knight takes g5, and again white threatened to take on h7 with a mate, so black cannot recapture the knight on d5. If black capture with the pawn on d5, then after rook fe1, again there's no defense against rook takes e7. It's similar story with bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, and e takes d5, rook f e1, and there's no good defense against rook takes e7. So in the game, black play b4, attacking white's knight, hoping that if white's knight leave, then black can take this pawn on d5 with the knight. So of course white doesn't move the knight, but play d6. Queen takes d6, knight to e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes e7, so white won an exchange by force. Queen to c6, bishop takes e4, queen takes e4, queen takes e4, knight, bishop takes e4, bishop b4, knight c6, bishop f8, and white is just an exchange up, and Bacrot converted to a win in the end game. Next, we will look at another game in the Nimzo-Indian opening. This game is between Topalov and Le Quang. We will see how Le Quang managed to handle the isolated pawn structure with black. The game started with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4. This is the Nimzo-Indian, and white chose the line with e3, the Rubinstein variation. Castle, bishop d3, c5, knight f3, d5, castle, c takes d4, e takes d4, d takes c4, bishop takes c4, b6. Now white again has the isolated pawn in the center, the d4 pawn, and the position is very similar to what we have seen so far. White developed the bishop to g5, black developed the bishop to b7. White moved the pieces to the center, developed the rook to c1. Here black play h6, bishop h4, knight to c6, bishop d3, bishop e7. You can see this is a very important move to make. The black's bishop has to be on e7 so that the black's queen can move without worrying about bishop takes f6, and bishop e7 also release black from the pin, so the knight can also move to d5, for example. This knight on c6 in a lot of cases can move to b4 just to control the d5 square. It can go back to d5 later. So after bishop e7, white continue with the normal move bishop b1, so to give the d3 square for his queen. In a lot of cases white can go queen d3 or queen c2, so creating the threat of bishop takes f6 and queen h7. Black played rook c8. White centralized the rook with rook to e1, and here it is an important moment of the game. White pieces are already well placed, and black has to decide what to do with his king side. It could be dangerous because at some point white will play queen d3 or queen c2, creating a real threat on h7. So black has to exchange this bishop on e7 with this bishop on h4 by moving the knight. But the question is where to move the knight. For example, if knight to d5, white can play bishop to g3, keeping the bishop and maintaining the pressure on the king side. Therefore, Le Quang play knight to h5, offering the exchange of the bishop. and at the same time control g3. So white's bishop, if it goes back to g3, black will just exchange that dangerous bishop. After knight h5, Sokolov tried queen to c2, creating the threat of queen h7 checkmate. So black has to play g6, and white probably miscalculated this position. He played rook takes e6, with the hope that if f takes e6, then queen takes g6 check, knight g7, queen h7 check, king f7, and bishop g6 checkmate. However, black found this move, knight to f4, and not only that the knight defend g6, it also attacking the rook on e6, and the bishop on h4 is also hanging, so all white pieces are hanging and there's no real threat to the black king. Sokolov decided to sacrifice the exchange with rook takes e7, knight takes e7, but this wasn't enough. Queen d2, g5, and black is an exchange up. Knight to e5, knight e g6, knight takes g6, f takes g6, bishop g3, knight takes g2, and the rest is a simple win for Le Quang, because he's an exchange up, and white's king is also now vulnerable. Queen c2, queen f6, bishop e5, queen f7, a3, knight to h4, bishop a2, queen takes a2, and white resign because after knight takes a2, rook takes c2, rook takes c2, knight f3, check, king f1, bishop a6 check, king g2, knight e1 check, and white is losing the rook on c2. Now we will look at another game. This is my game against Grandmaster Harikrishna from India in 2009. The game started as a Semi-Slav opening, d4, d5, c4, c6, knight c3, knight f6, e3, e6, knight f3, knight bd7, queen c2, bishop d6, bishop d3, castle, castle, d takes c4, bishop c4, a6, a4, c5, rook d1, c takes d4, e takes d4. Again, this is the isolated pawn structure. White has the d4 pawn, which is not supported by any other pawn on the c or the e file, and he has a little bit more space. This bishop can go to g5, and this bishop can go back to a2 and maybe b1, so to create the threat on h7. Black, on the other hand, has good control over the d5 square. He played knight b6, which is the best move. Bishop b3, bishop d7. So you can see that all black pieces are developing to control d5. This bishop is going to c6. This knight is going to d5. And that is a very firm control of the most important square in this type of position. Bishop d7, I play bishop g5, bishop c6, queen to d3, defending the f3 knight, and also leaving the square c2 for the bishop. Rook c8, and here I decided to spend some time to weaken his king side. I play bishop c2, forcing black to play g6, and then after black play g6, this diagonal b1, h7 is closed, so this bishop is better to be placed on b3, so it goes back to b3. It may look like a waste of time, but actually I weakened the king side, the dark squares around the black king. So now the bishop is well placed on b3, and at some point I can try to play d5. So black has to go back, bishop e7 to defend the dark squares. Knight go to e5. Black continue his plan with knight bd5, putting the pieces on d5 square. Rook ac1. Here my pieces are very well placed. The bishop and the knight on e5 are attacking this diagonal. And this bishop can also sometimes go to h6, or in some cases I might consider h4, h5 also. So all these are very typical plans for the isolated pawn structure. My opponent play a5, trying to establish outpost on b4. I continue with h4. First of all, it's a prophylactic move that gives some space to my king in the endgame, so I don't have to worry about the back rank mate later. Secondly, I defended my bishop on g5, and thirdly, I have the option to play h5 in some variation. My opponent played rook e8. I continue to activate my pieces with bishop c4. Now I also have this square on b5, which is a really nice square. I can bring my knight or my bishop over there. My opponent played knight to d7, trying to exchange some pieces. Of course, with the isolated pawn, when you are the side with the isolated pawn, it makes more sense to keep as many pieces as possible, because the more pieces you exchange, the more vulnerable your isolated pawn becomes. So, and you need more pieces to attack. So I keep my knight. I play knight to e4. This knight on e5, I'm not worried about knight takes e5, because d takes e5 and I have a very nice square on d6, and also that I solved the problem of the isolated pawn. Now it's on e5 and it would be in a very strong position. So my opponent play knight 5 to f6, and this is actually an exchange sacrifice after bishop takes f6. Bishop takes f6. He has to take with the bishop, because after knight takes f6, I have knight g5, and there's no defense against knight takes f7. My opponent play bishop takes f6, and after knight d7, bishop d7, knight d6, forking the black rooks, and he has to give the exchange. However, he has compensation. He took on a4, knight takes e8, queen takes e8, b3, bishop c6, d5, e takes d5, bishop d5, bishop takes h4. So black has 2 pawns for the exchange, which is pretty good. However, at a closer look, you can see that white can force the exchange of the queen, and then in the end game, black's queen side pawn can become a weakness. I play queen e4, and after the forcing move, queen takes e4, bishop e4, bishop e7, rook c4, rook b8, bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, rook d3. It is a difficult position to defend for black, because black has 2 weaknesses on the queen side. The a5 pawns and the c6 pawns. Under white has only 3 pawns left, but if I manage to keep all my pawns, I have really good winning chances. My opponent plays c5, I play rook to a4. Of course, it would be black's dream to be able to put this bishop to b4, so it can defend both the pawns, but unfortunately, he didn't get enough time to do that. After rook a4, he has to defend the pawn on b5 with rook b5, and then I played rook f3 to prevent this bishop from coming to f6 and d4. He played bishop d6, I played king f1, h5, rook to e4, activating the rook, king g7, king to e2, rook b8, king to d2. My king is going over to the queen side to attack black's pawn. Rook b7, king to c3. So I'm threatening king c4, king d5. Rook a7. Of course, now if king c4, then black has a4 and exchange the pairs of pawns on the queen side. So I played rook to a4, stopping that idea. He played bishop e7, king c4, g5, rook to d3, rook to a6, king b5, rook f6, f3. So I managed to win this pawn on a5. However, the materials is very limited, so if black can manage to exchange all the white's pawn, then it's clearly a draw. He played rook to e6, king takes a5, rook e2, rook e4, rook a2 check, king b5, bishop f6, and I have to keep my pawn on g2, so I play g3, bishop d4, f4, g4, king c4, rook b2, and here I realized that it is actually black is in a strong position, so I play rook to e8. The point is that black's rook cannot leave the b file, because otherwise, if blacks move the rook, for example, to g2, then I would have played b4, and this pawn becomes a pass pawn, because black cannot capture the pawn because the bishop is hanging. So black's rook has to stay on the b file, and the black's king has to stay on g7 also, because if king f6 or king g6, I would have played rook to g8 and rook to g5, winning this h pawn. So he has to play rook to b1, and then I played rook to e2, controlling the important second rank and bringing my rook to h2 to attack the h5 pawn. King to f6, rook h2, king g6, king d5, and again black is so strong. The bishop cannot move because it has to defend c5. The rook cannot move because b4 is coming. So black can only move the king to h6, and then my rook has another square to go to a2. The idea is to go to a6 and forcing black's king to go back to g7. So he decided to go h4, sacrifice the pawn. Then I took on h4, king h5, king e4, and black cannot take on h4 because of rook h2 checkmate. So he has to play rook e1, king f5, rook e6, And now before attacking c5 square, rook f6 check, king e4, bishop g1, rook g2, and this is a winning position. Rook e6, king f5, bishop d4, b takes c5, and I just take on his pawns and still win an exchange up. Rook f6, king e4, bishop c5, rook d5, king h4, rook takes c5, and this is a win for me. Now we will look at another game with an isolated pawn structure. This game is between Kramnik and Topalov in the European Championship club in 2015. Let's start with d4, knight f6, knight f3, e6, e3, c5, bishop d3, b6, castle, bishop b7. This is a rare variation of the Queen's Indian. c4, c takes d4, e takes d4, bishop e7, knight c3, d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5. Now white has the isolated pawn on d4, and black has the bishop on b7 already controlling d5. White play knight e5, a very common move, activating the knight and giving the queen a lot of options to attack black's king side. Castle, queen to g4, and here Topalov decided to close the king side by playing f5. The main line is knight to f6 and queen h4, and it's a very complicated line for both sides. Topalov decided to play f5. That's an interesting move. Queen to e2. So now you can see that there are some significant change in the structure. Black closed this diagonal d3, h7. However, he now has a major weakness on e6, which is no longer protected by the pawn on f7. Black keeps good control over the d5 square. White also has a very nice knight on e5. So black play bishop f6. I should also mention that one of the most typical trap in this position is that black cannot play knight to d7 because knight c6, bishop takes c6, and queen takes e6 check, king h8, and queen takes c6, winning a pawn for white. So Topalov play bishop f6, white play bishop c4. Again, this diagonal is closed, so white brings the bishop to a more active diagonal, c4, g8. Rook to e8, rook d1. Black play knight to d7. White play bishop b5, pinning the black's knight on d7. Black took on e5, d takes e5. So now white get rid of his isolated pawn. The pawn has switched from the d file to the e file, which can be protected by the f pawn. If needed, it can go to f4. And also right now white has the bishop pair advantage. Bishop b5 and bishop c1 are very strong bishops. So Topalov played queen to e7, getting the queen away from the d file. Knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, queen to h5, threatening bishop g5. Black play g6, queen to h6, rook ec8, bishop g5, queen f7, and here is a very interesting decision which Kramnik took on d7, giving away the bishop pair advantage, but making sure that the dark square around black's king are permanently weak. After bishop f6, this square g7 h8 is very weak, and white always has the idea to play h4 h5 and bringing the rook to attack black's king. Topalov play queen to f7 and Kramnik play b3, slowly but surely improving his position. Queen to f8, queen f4, rook c2, h4, and this is a very strong attack. Rook ac8, h5, queen e8, rook d3. The rook is coming to g3 or h3 after the opening of the h file. It will be very dangerous. Black tries to exchange this pair of rook with rook to c3, rook a d1, bringing another rook to the game. G takes h5, and here Kramnik play a very nice tactic with rook takes d5, e takes d5, e6, attacking the black's rook on c3, and blacks cannot take on e6 because after queen g5, king h7, queen g7, king e8, bishop takes c3. Black loses the rook, so black has to go with rook 3 back to c7, then rook takes d5, queen takes e6, queen g5, king f8, rook takes f5, and this is losing for black. Rook f7, queen h6, king e8, rook e5, winning the queen, rook c6, and queen takes h5, and Topalov resigned. So what we can learn from this game is that usually it's not good to weaken your king side by moving the f pawn to f5 when you are black. F5 is a very committal move that, although you stopped white's attack on h7, you weaken so significantly your diagonal c4 g8, and e6 becomes a permanent weakness. And after that, the way that Kramnik exploits his advantage is very instructive. He just play very natural move and bringing the bishop to c4, rook to d1, and then later on exchanging the bishop for the knight and making sure that the dark square bishop is placed on f6. And although it is an opposite color bishop, it is not drawish at all because there are so many pieces on the board, especially the major pieces, the rooks and the queens, and when you are attacking, the opposite color bishop usually favors the attacking side because there is no way he can exchange your dark square bishop here, and this dark square bishop is very valuable in creating the attack on the king side. In chapter 1, we have studied the isolated pawn structure. In this type of position, one side has an isolated pawn in the center and the other side has active play against the isolated pawn. So the side with the isolated pawn always has to try to attack the other side's king by developing the pieces. For example, with white bishop to g5, bishop to c4, queen d2, rook to the center, and at some point trying to break through with the isolated pawn push forward. The side without the isolated pawn always has to try to establish a blockage in front of the isolated pawn and attack the pawn with the other pieces. The isolated pawn can be an advantage and a disadvantage, and going through the games that I give you as an example will help you develop the understanding of this structure.
Hi, this is Grandmaster Damian Lemos. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, the 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from onlinechesslessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damian for onlinechesslessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.